5 people lay dead in the snow. The streets of Boston echoed with screams. Smoke drifted through the cold March air. British soldiers stood with muskets still warm from the shots they had just fired. Within hours, word spread throughout the colonies. To some, it was self-defense. To others, it was cold-blooded murder. This was the Boston Massacre, the night that pushed America one step closer to revolution. By 1770, Boston had become the center of growing resistance against British rule. For years, Parliament had imposed new taxes on the colonies, including the Stamp Act and the Townshend Acts. Many Bostonians refused to accept them. Merchants organized boycotts. Crowds protested in the streets. British customs officials struggled to enforce the new laws. To restore order, Britain stationed nearly 2,000 soldiers in Boston, a city of only about 16,000 people. For many colonists, it felt less like protection and more like an occupation. Fights between civilians and soldiers became increasingly common. Everyone knew something was coming. No one knew how deadly it would be. It was a cold winter evening. Outside the customs house, a lone British soldier stood guard. A young apprentice reportedly insulted the soldier, and a crowd quickly gathered. Snowballs flew. Some reportedly contained ice, oyster shells, or stones. People shouted insults. "Bully! Lobster back!" The crowd grew larger. Captain Thomas Preston arrived with additional soldiers to reinforce the guard. The tension was unbearable. The soldiers were surrounded. Someone yelled, "Fire!" But who? To this day, no one knows for certain. Then a shot rang out. Moments later, several more followed. When the smoke cleared, 5 colonists lay dead or dying. Among those killed was Crispus Attucks, a sailor of African and Native American ancestry. Many historians remember him as the first person killed in the struggle that would become the American Revolution. The other victims included Samuel Gray, James Caldwell, Samuel Maverick, and Patrick Carr. Their deaths shocked the colonies. Funerals drew thousands of mourners. The event quickly became one of the most talked about incidents in colonial America. News traveled fast, but facts traveled slower. Patriot leaders saw an opportunity. Silversmith Paul Revere created an engraving depicting British soldiers firing in perfect formation into a peaceful crowd. The image spread throughout the colonies. Although historians now know the confrontation was more chaotic than Revere's engraving suggested, it became one of the most influential pieces of political propaganda in American history. The British soldiers were portrayed as ruthless killers. Public anger intensified. Despite widespread outrage, the British soldiers received a trial. Remarkably, the defense attorney was none other than John Adams, a man who would later become the second president of the United States. Adams believed that everyone deserved a fair trial, regardless of public opinion. After hearing the evidence, the jury acquitted 6 soldiers. 2 were convicted of manslaughter rather than murder after it was determined they had fired their weapons. The verdict remains one of the earliest examples of the importance of due process in American history. The Boston Massacre did not start the American Revolution, but it changed how many colonists viewed British rule. Trust continued to fade. The divide between Britain and the colonies grew wider. Only 3 years later, another confrontation in Boston would ignite even greater outrage. It would become known as the Boston Tea Party. The Boston Massacre was more than a street fight. It became a symbol of growing resistance, political division, and the struggle over who held power in America. In our next episode, we'll uncover how a shipment of tea worth thousands of pounds ended up floating in Boston Harbor, and why one night of protest became one of the most famous acts of defiance in history. If you enjoyed this episode, subscribe and join us as we continue exploring the history of America, one chapter at a time.